All right, welcome back, everyone, to day 4 of KeyShot World 2020. This is session number 2. I'm Derek Cicero, Vice President of Products and Strategy here at Luxion. Thank you again for joining us. As I mentioned at the outset of this on Monday, this is a 9-day event. So this is day 4 and go through tomorrow. There'll be one session tomorrow at 10 a.m. Then we're going to take the weekend off, as we all should. Going to come back Monday for 4 more days. So definitely take a look at the agenda, see what's coming up. I'll talk a little bit about some of the things related to materials today. But yeah, just so you know, we're still coming at you next week, so stay tuned for us, okay? As always, you can follow our live feed on the homepage. You'll see it. It'll pop up at 10 and noon. It'll say watch live, or Zoom or YouTube. If you subscribe to our YouTube channel, it will alert you that we're going live. So that's a great way to stay informed and notified. Our first presentation today was KeyVR, Best Practices and Workflows with Jesper Mosgaard. It was a great way to kind of see how we developed KeyVR, kind of some of the technology behind it and what he did to implement that, as well as how it's used in a KeyShot workflow. The idea behind KeyVR for us is, to do VR, but do it the KeyShot way, right? How do you have a very simple one-click solution where you take a model in KeyShot, you bring a CAD file and you load it in the KeyShot, bam, click the button, you're in HTC Vive, you're in Oculus, you're in Windows Mixed Reality, and it's a very, very effortless flow. And so what we found is, more and more people are asking us, I want to get VR and AR into my design decision-making process. How do I do it? The answer is KeyVR. But you should definitely check it out. He talks about multi-connect, multi-user, or VR Connect, which is a multi-user application. So you get multiple people all looking at the same VR scene at the same time, which is fantastic. That's going to come out in beta soon. He also gave a little sneak peek of something in alpha, which is super cool, which is the AR thing we're doing with NVIDIA and their Cloud XR. So actually going from KeyShot into KeyVR and then boom, into AR on a tablet. So if you didn't watch that, I definitely recommend it. If you're at all curious about VR or AR or what we are doing, go watch it. It was fantastic. So today, our next session at noon is Materials Essentials with Ryan Levy. I mentioned this earlier, but if you go on exclusive content, you can actually get, I'm looking at it right now, you can go and grab the file he's going to be using today, and you can follow along with it. So it's on exclusive content. Grab that. I'll wait. I'll just wait while you download it. Just kidding. It's a pretty quick download. Reminder, stick around for the Q&A today, second session today. That means giveaway. Today is an RTX 5000, which is pretty fitting given that we have a KeyVR session today. So that'll happen afterwards. Thank you to the fine folks at NVIDIA for providing that RTX 5000. So that will be at the end of the Q&A session with Ryan. So Materials Essentials. This session right now is going to go over material library, properties, image procedural textures. So a really great way to kind of dig in on materials and really get you started. That's why it's called Essentials. And then just so you know, if you haven't the agenda already, want to read ahead, we have 2 sessions coming to you on Monday that are about advanced materials. So that's going to get into the material graph and multimaterials. And the second session is going to get into real cloth and fuzz. So if you, excuse me, if you've been excited to learn materials, today's your day. Watch Ryan's presentation, come back on Monday. It's going to be fantastic. And yeah, with that, let's get started. Ryan Levy, take it away.
Thank you very much, Derek. I just want to note your presence and delivery for the past few days have been outstanding. And I'm getting used to speaking into a microphone, so maybe it's time we start to think about doing a maybe a podcast, something like that.
Sign me up. I'm ready.
All right, let's do it. So for those of you who weren't here a few days ago, I just want to introduce myself again. My name is Ryan Levy. I am the Global Training and Creative Specialist here at Luxion. You'll see my email, my LinkedIn, and I've also put my Instagram on there as well, so feel free to reach out. So today we're going to cover Materials Essentials. So let's look at a few of the topics there. So Cloud Library, which we touched on a few days ago, KeyShot Material Library, Material Properties, basic, and I'll talk about advanced a little bit. We are going to cover that next week with Kareem a little bit more and get more into depth with that. So image textures and procedural textures and applying those to your materials. We'll look at that, and then also multi-materials. So let's jump right in. So Derek mentioned you can download this model on our website. So if you have this, great, follow along. If not, maybe pull in another model. It's totally fine. So first thing I want to chat about is the the cloud library. We touched on this a little bit the other day as well, but we talked about the new models tab, and in this time, I just want to mention our materials tab. You can find a large collection of user-generated materials along with KeyShot-generated materials from our teams here. A lot of these are just great to use, great to download, and the way to download them is just to click on it, hit the download button, or drag it over to your material library, and they'll show up right here in this little tab. So if I hit download, you'll see that appear in your downloads. Cool. So moving on to material library. So in this tab right here, you'll see a vast collection of materials, pre-built, out of the box, ready to go. These materials also include both basic and more advanced materials. Keep an eye out also for, like, when KeyShot 9 came out, we added some new materials in here, such as fuzz and real cloth, and along with some others. So really, really great to just drag and drop onto your models if needed. I mentioned also the other day, possibly if you need to, switch this list icon or switch over to the list view here. If you're having trouble reading these descriptions, or you can also adjust the scale of these icons. I also want to note, and what I've done today actually, is you should utilize the favorites tab. I use this all the time. So if I have any kind of materials that I really enjoy using, I'll right click on that and add to favorites. So I've created my own favorites folder here called Materials Essentials, and you'll see them right here. So it's just a nice little collection of these assets. So moving on to properties, material properties. So you'll notice that this model is just a diffuse color. I added these colors within my modeling program, which I used, I think, Cinema 4D for this. Don't judge it too much. This is actually my first modeling project. I don't have a vast background in that, but I'm getting better at that. So I'm going to unpause my scene, my real-time view. And I just want to mention, once you have materials that you've created, you can actually save these out into this library. So as you can see, I just dragged and dropped this gold material. And in order to save your materials, you hit this little floppy disk. Let's talk a little bit about material properties in a second, but before I do that, I just want to bring over some of these saved materials from my favorites library. So just like kind of a nice plastic housing, this like front speaker grill. I just have like a aluminum type of material for that. And then I think we're good to go on this for now. So what I want to do with this front speaker grill is add this mesh kind of image-based texture to. But before I do that, I do want to pull up my presentation again, because I have a slide that will help describe a few of the properties that we'll see in a moment. So maybe take a screenshot of this if you need to, or jump online and look into more of the science behind a lot of this. Diffuse is the color of the object itself, like the base color. Specular is the point where the point on the object where light strikes it. Roughness determines the sharpness of that specular reflection. You'll start to see a little bit more breakup of that color here. And refractive index, the measurement of bending of a light ray. And definitely go online, check out, if you can, more of the science behind a lot of these. All right, so let's go into these properties a little bit. So I have, if you look in this drop down here, I'm using more of a basic material for this front plate, where I'm going to have the mesh, basically the speaker grill, placed. And you'll notice some of these settings in here. Now that I'm using a metal type material, there's some great adjustments you can make in here. I'm using a measured material of aluminum, but there's plenty of other materials that are the real world measurements of roughness and color. And also you can make adjustments using any kind of custom colors you'd like. So let's go ahead and add our first texture. And this texture is going to be an image-based mesh. And I'll describe how image-based textures, along with procedural-based textures, and applying those onto your parts or models. So first thing I want to do, I have this image-based texture. I'm just going to drag this over to this part. And when I do that, this dialog pops up, and I can select where how I want this mapped. So I'm going to choose opacity because I want to be able to see through this texture to that, I guess, the back plate of the speaker, so to speak. And you'll notice when I do that, that texture is added to my opacity over here in my properties. You can also adjust the mapping type of these textures. And right now, this is mapped to a box. So a good way to visualize that and how that's working is hitting this move texture button, and you can see how this image is projected. It's coming in all 6 sides there. But that's not really what how I want to project it. I want to project it as a planar map, so it just shoots in one direction. So if I hit planar, you'll see it's projecting in kind of an odd way. It's not giving me what I need. So if I hit move texture, you'll see how that's being projected, and that's downward, and I don't want that. So a good way to adjust this, a fast way to do it, rather than clicking and dragging these handles, is to hit move texture. And down in this little dialog box, you'll see fit to, and this is a fast way to set those textures. So that's a helpful hint right there. So I'm going to hit OK. And once that is placed, you have the ability to make some adjustments to size here. Also repeating that pattern. A few other aspects of this. So the one thing that you are unable to do is really adjust the shape and size of this image-based texture. And that's where procedurals come in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take away this opacity map of this image-based. And once I do that, that's cleared off of my front panel there. And you'll see a drop down within the properties right here. And what this is a list of procedurals that we have here in KeyShot. And for this particular texture, I want to use a mesh procedural. And you'll see that it's kind of covering the whole thing. It's scaled a little large. So I'm going to center that on part, so it's just looking at that particular part. And if I move texture like we just talked about before, actually before I do that, I want to set this to my planar. And now under here, you'll see a lot more parameters, a lot more settings you can work with. So I'm going to scale this down, and this is really the difference between procedural and image-based. So if I scale this down, also move texture, you'll see that it's projecting down. I don't want that. So I'm going to hit my Z coordinates. And I'm going to scale this down a little bit more, maybe bump that up to there. Actually, let's go a little bit more. So also, this is a really great function. I can clip this texture, which means I don't really want this to run edge to edge. So if I enable both of those settings, I'm going to unlink these as well. So I can start to see, let's bump these down quite a bit. You can start to see how that's projecting in a specific area that I want. So let's bump this up a little bit. Give me a little bit of time to set this. I'm going to move this texture over. So when I hit that, the little dialog box pops up here. Hit translate. I can just pull that texture over here, make any other adjustments that I need to. Oops, I don't want to go that far. Let's go down to there. Maybe pull this a little bit out. So as you can see, it's really powerful. You can do a lot there. So also I want to mention, some of these other settings like fall off. If I go in here just to take a look at this, you'll see how that affects that pattern as well. We also have different settings for staggered patterns. It doesn't have to be as linear. So definitely play around with those settings as well. Pattern spacing, it's keeping the same kind of pattern as before, but it's just kind of widening those spaces in between. You can also play with distortion and jitter. So what I said before, I mean, this is where the power of procedurals really come into play. So now that I'm happy with that, what I want to do here is actually, I want to create a multi-material. So what I'm going to do is, just to showcase how this works, if I hit this button up here, that enables multi-material, and you'll see that this front plate is already on that list. And you can go through and add a new material, to start off with, or duplicate this material, or even duplicate and link the textures. So if you do that, this mesh procedural that we created will remain. So also want to note, if I were to bring another texture from my library over here, and I'm not going to let go just yet, but you'll see up here, it says hold Alt to retain textures and or Control to retain labels, and hold Shift to add as a submaterial. So what I'm going to do first is I am going to hold Alt, and you'll see what happens here. So let's, actually I already have that in use. However, you'll see that the same mesh texture is still applied when I do that. Another thing to note is that you can bring over materials from your library and just drag and drop into your multi-material list. So you can toggle between different looks really simply. Let's see what else we got here. Okay. Now that we have these two materials, I'm actually just going to delete this one just because I want to get something a little bit cleaner over here. I'm going to select another material. Let's get like a chrome brushed, and let's make some adjustments to this material. I'm going to shrink up this texture a bit. We're not going to have any, actually, you know what I want to do? I'm going to delete this. I'm going to duplicate and link these materials. And then, actually, let's do this. I'm sorry, guys. I'm not going to link those materials because I want this mesh to remain. So I'm actually just going to make some color changes to this one. Let's go like a little bit darker of a color there on that metal. Push OK. And now that we have materials, multi-materials set, also want you to take note down here in this box, in this dialog box. This is actually like a collection of the materials that you're using in your scene. So you can right-click on these and make adjustments from there as well. Jump into the material graph for these. And you can link materials within this window and really start to clean up your scene there as well. I just also want to note, since we are in here with multi-materials, if you were to hit render and you're ready to go, you have all your settings and materials ready to go. In the queue, you can add multi-material. So what that's going to do is going to allow you to select all of those changes or color or texture differences in your multi-materials. So you can just add both of those. I'm going to hit render, and that'll shoot out all of those different types. So you'll see right here, frame count. So I got to jump back a little bit. I did mention this the other day, but I really have to stress it, that when you have multiple materials on your object, you can hold shift and click an object, hold shift and right click on another part. Well, that's a bad example because I have a plate behind that. And it'll apply and link those materials. So if I were to make a change to this, let's just change the color to more of like a KeyShot blue. All of those materials will change along with that one setting. So really helpful there. I think that's pretty much it for this demonstration. I know it ran a little shorter than we had hoped, but I definitely want to get on to some questions, and we can also demo as we go. So I might kick this back to Derek at this point.
Okay, great. The first question from the users is, when do you need to save materials in the material editor?
I'm sorry?
When do you need to save? I think they're asking, when you're in the material editor, what's the saving process?
Sure. Yeah, as I mentioned before, it's this little floppy disk. I don't know if people are even familiar with these anymore. I know I am. I'm a little older. No, I'm not. I'm in my 30s. So you just hit this button right here. And you can add this to any folder within our resources, or add to your own custom folder. And I already have that in that folder, which is right here. If I go down to my shared folders, I already have these saved in here. And let me just note, the way to do that and create shared folders is to go into your preferences and go into the folders tab here. So you can add a collection of new materials that you might be using for a specific project, or you have a number of other teammates that need access to these materials. So that's a great way to do that as well.
Okay, great. Another question is using a gradient on fuzz to kind of get like a look where sort of the fuzz is changing color as it goes.
Yeah, so in order to do that, let me pull in another model here. Let's just pull in something simple. I know we're going to get more into material graph and fuzz next week. However, I'll help kind of run through this quickly. So I'm just going to double click that object, go into my material graph. And if you add your geometry node of fuzz, I'm going to go ahead and execute that. Obviously, that object is really small. So let me show you, let me just adjust these settings a little bit. Put some randomness on there. Let me knock this up to about 20. We got to get this a little bit prepped up. So I'm going to execute that one. And then also knock the radius way down here. So in order to do like color adjustments, you can add color gradients, which is if you right click in the material graph, go to textures, color gradients. This is where you're going to be able to adjust colors underneath and also the surface of that fuzz, which you'll need a material for. And I'll just pick like a plastic material here. So if I plug this right into diffuse, hit C on the keyboard, you can see how that's mapped. I'm just going to set this to, let's set this to, I don't know, let's do something fun here. Okay. And I hope that answers your question. That's just a quick way to do that.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah.
Here's a question that's actually not materials related, but since we have some time, one person's asking about ground shadows and occlusion and how the normal ground shadows are a little low on contrast and how you kind of would darken those up.
Sure.
Any tips on that?
Yeah, a good way to do this is in your environments tab, we do have ground shadows setting here. You can turn that on or off and hit occlusion ground shadows. That's going to tighten up those shadows a little bit more and give you a little bit more depth in there. So let me pull this actually off. Let me go ahead and move this cube up a little bit so we can see this better. So if I'm in here, I go to my environments, turn off occlusion. So that's a good way to do that. Also, you can go ahead and add, let's see, add a ground plane. So that's just another kind of piece of geometry that you can't see. It's transparent, but this will give you a little bit more customization as far as roughness or reflections or things like that. You can also add textures to these as well and work with the reflectivities and things like that.
Great. One person's asking for glass materials, does it have to be a watertight geometry? And it does not. One person's asking, when you drag the gold onto the speaker grill, the grill holes also apply to the gold knobs. That's probably solved by unlinking materials, right? Sort of more of a question.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's just the linking of materials there. So just to recap, just make sure that, anything that's going to have, any parts that are going to have the same materials, a good way to do that is to link those.
Great. One user's asking, does the opacity map actually simulate real holes in the object, or is it just placing sort of a black circle pattern on the surface?
That's a good question. Let me just open up that file again. I don't know if we'll have too much time to go over that, but what's going on here is that if I open this up again, I'm just going to double click that. Let me just try to knock this out really quick for that person. Let's see. Planar, move this to Z, and let's scale this down quite a bit. I'm going to drag this over to opacity. I also want to hide this, where is it here? Take off how these guys, inner panel, there it is. So now you can kind of see through here. So actually a trick for this, and you'll see that these opacity maps, you won't get any depth off, instantly through that opacity map. It's just going to cut through on that one plane. However, a good way to make changes to that, and actually was working with someone recently in this speaker business that was like, hey, you know what, we need some depth when we apply that opacity map, and a good way to do that is to use displacement in your material graph, and then applying that that mesh twice, basically. It's kind of hard to explain. We don't really have a lot of time to go into that. It's a little bit more advanced, but you can add depth to these using displacement. But whoever asked that, if you want to reach out to me, I have a demo file to showcase that, and I can walk you through that as well.
Great. How do you choose between procedural and image textures?
So image textures are great for example, I would use image-based textures for like more real-world effects, such as, you know, tree bark or some kind of stone effect. So that's when I would use that. But for more pattern or just a lot more flexibility, I tend to use procedurals a lot. And another thing to keep in mind is that when you're using image-based textures, you can run into seams with that. So unless those maps are perfectly repeatable, you might run into seams. So that can be a limitation for image-based maps.
Okay, great. Is there a way to visualize which materials are linked? So when you're linking materials, is there a way to say, like, where is this material linked to?
A good way to do that that I find is actually just either double clicking on a material and making a change to it and seeing what happens, but also using this menu down here to see where those materials are linked. So like you'll see that this yellow diffuse color, there's only one material ball down here. So I'll know that all of these are linked. If I'm seeing multiple material balls of the same color, you'll know that those are not linked.
Great. One person's asking for the multi-material function. They're asking, is it meant to kind of show all the color options within an item, or is it meant for layering materials? And the answer is the first. It's meant to show all the different options. And I don't know if you can briefly touch upon the configurator wizard, Ryan, and how multi-materials essentially would allow you to export out the ability to sort of see the different color variations within,
exactly.
Color material finish of an item.
Right, and I don't have an example pulled up now, but that's exactly right, Derek. It's it'll allow you to use those multi-materials to click through all of those effects and those properties really quickly. So that is another great use of multi-materials, is using the configurator. I think we have a session going over that next week.
Yes. Another question is regarding kind of cloud, or not really, they're asking for cloud library, but basically how to manage your own personal library within a team of materials.
So through a cloud, that's not possible through this cloud. But what I mentioned before is going to your preferences, and I hope I'm answering the question properly, but in the folders tab here, you'll see that you have the ability to point KeyShot to any folder. I mean, it can be local, which this one is. I made an extra folder here that I'm sending, I'm looking for to pull up into my library. And, but also this can be used for servers at organizations. If you have a shared server or someone's logged, if everybody's logged into the same server and you put all your assets up there, you can point KeyShot to that specific folder. So everybody has access to that. And one thing to note is that I wouldn't recommend having everybody being able to make changes to those, maybe put a captain in charge and of your materials and click this on or off depending on who's making changes in there.
Okay, great. Can you output procedurals as an image?
Good question. I don't have an answer to that right now.
We'll find out. We'll put it on the forum.
That's a really good question.
Where do you go online to find texture maps?
Oh, that's another good question. So there's just such a huge like world of textures, and a lot of them are free and great. But I tend to use God, I can't think off the cuff right now. Polygon is one of my favorites as far as quality and fidelity of those maps. They also, I think, are working on building up procedural type maps as well. So it's Polygon, but it's Poliigon. So look into that one. That's all I can think of off the top of my head right now.
Okay. Can fuzz be used from a different surface material? I.e., could you have sort of a surface material that looks one way and have the fuzz be independent of that surface material?
There are ways to do that, sure. What you could do is maybe bring down the opacity to 0 of whatever this, the fuzz surface is, and then duplicate that base material, and make adjustments to that other material. That's kind of a walk around. That's the first thing that came to my mind, but yeah, it's possible.
Can you talk about how the pattern tool works with relation to materials? So if you have a part that's patterned, does it inherit the same material across the pattern, or can you have independent materials on a pattern?
That's another great question. Let me bring these over again because I'm tired of looking at this diffuse material. I'm just going to make this silver for now. So if I were to, and that's a great question, and yes, you can make adjustments to all of those patterned parts. So let me just do really quickly, maybe 2, and then bring these a little bit closer together. So as I made that pattern, these materials are linked, or they're not linked, my apologies. So you can make adjustments to those as you go.
Great. Is it possible to apply different materials to each face of an object? So the example they're giving is plywood would have obviously the face, and then the edge would be two different materials.
2 faces, yes. I believe that's a triplanar effect. I don't really have time to go into that, but I believe this can do it. And it might also be, if I'm hearing correctly, using let's see, your utilities in your material graph and doing color compositing. So you can add multiple maps that way. I hope that answers that.
Okay. What's the best way to transfer materials between users on a team if people are trying to kind of share materials? Obviously, you sort of showed the shared network drive. Any other suggestions on that?
Yeah, there's a few ways to go about that. You can create a material and share that material by just sending the actual MTL file and then importing it directly into your library. But I would recommend, if you are sharing with a team, to use the custom folders.
Great. Any tips on how to get replicate the look of paper? You're trying to doing package design, and you want something to really look like like a thick cardboard or a paper surface.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a few ways to do that. And I can try to do something really quickly here. Let's say, and I hope my lighting's okay for this, but if I am changing this material to maybe like a plastic, I want to give this a little bit more of a white texture here and change my roughness to maybe like a 0.5, something like that. This is not going to be fully accurate, but a few ways to do this is to add bump textures. And we'll go down to our procedurals. I tend to use this a lot for like smaller details, like plastics, and this is a good one as well to use it for, but noise and fractal and then texture. So fractal is going to give you that kind of inconsistent look, you know, more of a real life effect there. I hope you can see that okay. Let me just darken that paper up a little bit more. So I would use procedurals for that. You can also download image-based textures for that. But procedural is going to give you that really like in-depth customization that you're looking for. One other way to do this, you know, if you wanted some curve or something, you know, some adjustment to the actual geometry of this, is to use displacement and then apply this noise fractal to that displacement. So that way it's going to actually adjust your geometry and give you that real curve effect. Because bump, you know, it's a kind of a camera trick. So you're not going to get any depth to your geometry for that. It's just based on lighting.
Great. This next one might be a little complicated to go through right now, but we'll give it a shot. Someone's asking, they render a lot of brushed metal objects, and one of the issues they have is with brushed metal surfaces and getting the UV directions to go, and so it doesn't look like it's all kind of in one direction. So they kind of more of almost like a cross hatching type of thing, I assume. And so they're saying in order to make it look the way they want, it's basically create several versions of the same material with different texture properties. And so obviously when we want to make an edit, they have to go through and kind of change all of them, versus basically using the material graph to somehow accomplish that same concept. Can you speak to that a bit?
Well, if I'm understanding correctly, sounds like they're looking for more of an anisotropic effect to their metals. So obviously this isn't the best example and it requires a little bit more adjusting, but this will give you that kind of radial look where light will you know, bend in different ways. Let's say I just change this to more of a brushed look. Obviously this isn't the best example, but I would recommend whoever asked that to go onto YouTube. And I know that Richard Fennell did an incredible tutorial on that. That guy is just really knowledgeable, and he actually worked in that industry for a while, working with metals. So he's definitely, I would say, the man to look for on those details.
Okay, great.
But yeah, use anisotropic for that, I believe.
Okay, let me see here. There's a couple questions about real cloth. I would definitely recommend folks who want to learn more about real cloth to attend the sessions on Monday, because real cloth it's very powerful, but it does require a fair bit of really kind of background of what it is and how it works. And so Kareem and Soren, actually the developer, will be on those sessions on Monday. So for people who really want to dig into some of the more technical details of real cloth, I would definitely please guide you to those sessions on Monday.
Yeah, I'm going to be paying close attention to those too. Real cloth is beautiful. It's amazing.
I'm trying to see here any other questions.
Shoot them off, whatever they are. If I can't answer it, I'll say.
Is it possible to copy UV mapping to several elements that have a different position? So I think what they're asking is in the case of, like, I guess a table, would you UV map one leg and then copy and paste that to the 3 other legs?
Oof.
And the answer
really good question. I don't believe. Oh, that's a good question. I haven't tried that before, but I will try that after this session.
I don't think that's possible.
I don't think so either, because you have to make seams and all of that for UV.
So someone's asking, how do you kind of take a real world material and use it as a reference in KeyShot? So do you take like a picture of it and kind of bring it into KeyShot and use it as a reference? Do you just kind of eyeball it? What's sort of your technique if you were trying to match, like, say, a customer's material in KeyShot?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I mean, whenever I'm matching materials, I always, number one, I seek out a physical sample. And if that's not available, then I just go into Google and I look up, higher quality, larger imagery for that. And then sometimes I'll place that in my back plate, so your back images, whatever your back image is, let's say this is a texture, obviously it's some scene here, but I would reference that, within KeyShot. So rather than having a window up, I'm actually looking at it the whole time. So that's helpful too. But just use Google, find high quality imagery, and pull it up next to your render and get to work on that.
Wonderful. Someone else is asking, when rendering as a PNG with transparent background, the shadow has been turning gray/white. Is that what you were fixing with occlusion, or is there a different way?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
Yes, when rendering as a PNG with transparent background, the shadow has been turning out gray/white. So I think they're not getting sort of very dark shadows. Is that what you were fixing with the occlusion shadow, I think is the question.
Well, I think if they're bringing in PNGs with transparencies, that might have a lot to do with that particular PNG. Check and make sure that your whites are fully white and your dark colors are fully dark, and that determines your transparencies there. So I think that has a lot to do with the PNG itself.
Great.
If I answered that correctly.
For the folks that were asking about the brushed metals and Richard Fennell, I included in the Q&A a link to a blog post he did about managing horizontal and vertical brush and reflections with metals. So you can see that link there in the Q&A section.
Yeah, he's the master of it. I haven't mastered it yet, but I'm practicing.
When you map a texture, you can choose to center on part or center on model. With model, it means the whole scene. Question,
yes.
Which differences when you move that object? So I guess we're asking the difference between centering on a part or a model and what that means when you're moving the object itself when you do that.
Right. When let's say I want to add a bump to this, or so basically when you're mapping textures onto just a part right here, and whatever else is in your scene, that will correlate to whatever else is in your scene. It's kind of hard to explain for me right now, but when you're mapping directly to a part, it's just looking at that geometry rather than other geometry in your scene. I hope that answers that. I'm sorry I didn't have a better explanation right now for that.
It's okay. Some people are asking about the materials that you're showing and sort of the quality of them. Are these materials that you're showing all ones that you did? I know a number of them were just drag and drop from the cloud.
Exactly. That's what I did with these guys, these materials. But, if I were building these, I would either start just with the diffuse and then start building this out within the material graph. But in this case, these were just drag and drop. And then, from there, it's just adding little details as you go. And you'll start to see, adjustments I can make here. But yeah, all of these materials I use today were basic, just out of the library.
Great. What one person's asking, and I'll kind of start the answer, and then you can jump in at the end, is asking about sort of scan materials such as Visu and X-Rite and how they integrate into KeyShot. Yes, KeyShot supports both X-Rite and Visu. Actually, if you go onto our cloud library, there are example files out there. We actually have both scanners in our office in Tustin. So if you are someone who is trying to investigate the use of scanned materials, we can work with you to potentially, you can send some samples and we can scan them and send them back to you. Unfortunately, may not be able to do that for the next month or so, but at some point we can do that. And essentially what those materials do is, you can kind of maybe bring one up, Ryan, and sort of show the breakdown of the material itself.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, and so basically you can scan those in and bring them in, and they come directly into KeyShot. And yeah, it's relatively straightforward. The scanning process itself can be relatively time consuming depending on the complexity of the material and kind of what resolution you want to scan at. But yeah, I don't know if there's if you have a quick example.
Sorry,
if you go into the cloud library and you grab one, there's a ripstop fabric that we did. I believe if you probably just type in.
Here we go. Here's a few.
Yeah, so that first one, that blue ripstop nylon right there, that AXF.
Yep.
So yeah, that was scanned, and it actually came from our KeyShot Render World 2018 tote bag. We actually took a piece out and scanned that. So that's a good example of kind of the quality that you can get with a scan material.
Yeah, and I apologize. I don't use these often, but I'm definitely going to start doing that more so now.
Another question is how to get a really sharp shadow on the ground when you're, as opposed to sort of just more of a slow fading shadow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's what we looked at earlier was using occlusion ground shadows. We'll kind of tighten up and darken those for you. Also, it has a lot to do with your lighting and where that is placed. So, how soft those shadows will come through, but also using, definitely use the ground plane as much as you can, because there's a lot of flexibility there. So hopefully that helps answer that.
One person's asking with fabric and seams and stitch lines, should those be modeled in the CAD model? They could be achieved in KeyShot. I mean, generally speaking, if you're seeing sort of a seam on a shoe, that's usually going to be modeled in the CAD model itself. But I don't know actually with real cloth that you can kind of do sort of a fake stitch. I haven't actually really tried that. I mean, it's certainly not what the purpose of real cloth is. But yeah, I think most of the time when you see that, that's going to be an actual modeled stitch.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think there are ways around that, maybe using your own image-based textures or even procedural to create that effect. It's not going to be geometry at that point, though.
Someone's asking about a plugin for V-Stitcher. Great question. We have one. And so actually we just brought that out, I believe, 2 or 3 months ago. So if you're doing V-Stitcher, you can bring that into KeyShot very easily. There's not one with Clo 3D, just because they are not kind of that interested in working on that with us. But there certainly are ways to export from Clo and Marvelous and bring it into KeyShot, which is actually a very common workflow, especially now people are using row cloth, which is a level of fidelity that's kind of far beyond what anyone else has with regard to cloth. So if you're doing any work in Marvelous or Clo or V-Stitcher or Lotta, I definitely recommend the real cloth sessions on Monday. One person's asking for, I think, a clarification. So what they're talking about on the copying of the modified material is they want to take a material from one part and apply it to 10 other parts that are already linked, such that all 11 of them would then be linked. So I think what they're trying to say is I essentially have 10 items. How do I add an 11th item to it and make it take on the properties of the 11th item? Okay,
let's do that. So let me just pull these together again. I'm going to make another pattern. So quick way to do that is if you were, let's say, let me unlink this, change the color of it to like a blue color. So a quick way to do this is actually in your tree here, you can select, let's say, this part, right click on it, go to material, copy material, and then you can paste it onto here. Or if you have multiple models, you can do that as well. I hope that answers that.
Okay, great. I think that really kind of wraps up the majority of our questions here. I'm going to do a quick little pass. Yeah, I think that's it. We are, excuse me for one moment. Sorry, I had a quick cough. So I will take the screen from you now, Ryan, and we're going to do our giveaway. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Ryan, for the wonderful presentation. Reminder, again, we'll have one more session tomorrow at 10 a.m., and that will be advanced animation with Ryan. And then on Monday, we're going to have 2 more material sessions. So the folks who had those real cloth questions, I definitely recommend you attend those.
Oh, and also,
yes.
sorry to cut you off, Derek. That model that I was using today, I think that'll be used with for Render Weekly submissions, right, for that contest?
Well, so yeah, actually, we're going to kind of talk about that. So if you haven't already taken part in the Render Weekly contest this week with the Material Ball, please do so. It's very fun. The prize is a KeyShot license that we're giving away. I think what we're going to do next week is, and we'll include that item in there, is to actually have people build stuff off the cloud. So using the model library on the cloud and different elements on KeyShot Cloud and doing that as our render contest. So I think we can definitely put that model up there if it's not already and include that in there.
Awesome. Let's do that. One other quick note. Sorry, my presentation was a little shorter today, but I'm glad that we had time to answer some questions because there's a lot to cover within an hour. But a lot of the questions are really good. And like I put my information up earlier, just reach out to me and I'll help you with any more questions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. So our big winner today is David Heisner from Graham Packaging. You have won an NVIDIA Quadro RTX 5000. So congratulations to you, David. We will follow up with you directly over email and get that prize out to you. Thank you again to the fine folks at NVIDIA for providing the RTX 5000. I have one myself, and it is fantastic.
Can I win that, Derek?
You already have one. So Ryan, thank you again for coming. This adjourns our session for today. Reminder, come back tomorrow at 10 a.m. For the final day this week of KeyShot World 2020 Virtual Edition. I thank you all for attending, and we will see you out there soon.